and obviously this relates to socialism, and socialism beyond USSR and beyond Stalin. Of all Western countries, Britain is perhaps the best place to effect such a transition to socialism, and it is this event, so this is Perry Anderson quoting Thompson, which could at one blow break up the logjam of the capital Cold War and initiate a new wave of world advance. This idea is going back to the sea. Partly this is generational experience and the New Left as a body of people at a different point in time from Orwell's point, at an ending point or a low point. The idea of the New Left being at the beginning of a new life, a search for a new authority. Obviously in 1956, the Communist Party had been discredited through Khrushchev's speech, and real to have been as bad as the US. So this idea of political conscience, the problem with previous opposition between good and evil in the previous motivation for action had to be replaced, and the remedy, according to Thompson, is the move out into the streets to find a new youth, a new reality. Perhaps without our knowledge, the key to change has been tossed into British hands, again the tossed denoting the motion of the waves. The world waits impatiently upon us to turn the lock. You could almost interpret that as a canal metaphor as well. The materials for a definition of socialist humanism lie on every hand. Our own intellectual traditions rise to meet our needs. Our circumstances are favourable. Also, that last sentence, the sense of intellectual traditions rising, almost like a wave, and our circumstances are favourable. In other words, we are set fair. So turning to my own research. The New Left, at the beginning of the 1960s in Britain, articulated its political agenda against the slightly older generation who had been young and left-wing in the 1930s, and the sense that that generation felt its obedience to Moscow. And my own research was about a project of life story interviews that took place in the 1980s that was undertaken by an activist who who themselves and also her husband, this was a female activist, they had not left the British Communist Party even in 1956, and they themselves had been friends with E.B. Thompson and E.B. Thompson's family, but in 1956 they no longer visited each other. So the sense that that this 30s generation had been restricted from the outside, from authority and a kind of paternal authority, and had been disciplined and had been pressed in and had eliminated any emotion from themselves. And this is from an interview in which this is acknowledged. At one time, we used to sneak into cinemas. Thinking we shouldn't take time off politics to see a film. Well, so it was very narrow in many ways, and yet it wasn't narrow. It was a curious mixture, a sort of dedication. And as such, this alludes to the complication of being inside the whale while being outside the whale. This idea of being inside a cinema, not coming inside a cinema, and yet at the same time being narrow, even while being opening out. So I explore the sense in my research that this generation has not necessarily been repressed, but had actually been liberated by their allegiance, paradoxically. And political conscience had been a release, an escape from feelings, and from the sea of feelings, complications on the inside. Another testimony. One of my sisters had died of anorexia, and it was thought there was some connection between her virtual suicide and the unhappy relationships with my parents. This is by the first husband of the interviewer. They had a conversation as though they were simply colleagues, simply fellow actors. All my own problems were completely buried under this energy and enthusiasm. So the sense that the domestic is a space of sanctuary is questioned and is reversed. The sanctuary is in politics. So this relates, I think, a little bit to the sense of the idea of coming up for air. Freedom from responsibility in the youth of the world. Well, the world could be changed, and issues were simple. You were either on the right or the left. Now, as the outside world was changing, going extreme politically, was a way of gripping change from the outside, controlling from the outside. The danger was in the centre, through appeasement and threat of war. And in the circumstances of the 1930s, to be inside the whale was to be left to worry about the war, was left to be at the mercy of these vigorous forces which were shaping the interior. So the desire was for a kind of a perverse kind of evacuation into conflict in order to solve conflict and find the ultimate peace against the war which was coming into the home. And that's it. Thank you.